from a place of self-preservation, I think we can all take some agency in our lives, and we have to draw some boundaries for ourselves.
I'm Amy Woodall, and this is The Conscious Habit, a show from the People Forward Network. We're teaching you how to incorporate love and consciousness at work, at home, and the world at large. I'm Amy Woodall, and you're listening to the Conscious Habit Podcast. Today, my dear friend, Deseri Garcia, the founder of Vida Aventura, joins me as co-host. Together, we host the High Vibe Tribe retreats. We founded these retreats to have magical, transformational experiences for women in the highest vibe places around the world. And this new co-hosted series with Des and me is really intended to share more of our collective consciousness work to help you take a deep dive inside yourself and to elevate your vibe and your experience on this planet. Take a listen.
Hey, Conscious Habit listeners. Today, we are diving into a topic that's often overlooked, but incredibly important. We're talking about trauma at work. So whether it's a toxic work environment, harassment, stress of high stakes projects, it's like check, right? Workplace trauma can affect anyone. So we're happy that you're here and looking forward to diving in.
I think this is such an interesting topic to talk about, and really all of the ways that we might be affected and, sort of that bridge between trauma and burnout or trauma and chronic stress and our own experiences and what we can do about it and, all of that good stuff. So I'm excited to chat with you about it today, Des, and learn from you too, learn from some of the resources that you might have for the guests. But I'm curious what prompted this for you, because you were like adamant. We knew we were recording today, and I'm like, what's on your mind? What are we talking about? And you're like, trauma at work. I'm like, oh, okay. Keeping it light, nice and light on this Monday afternoon. We're recording on a Monday. I don't know when you're listening, but we're recording on a Monday.
Yeah, so not the lightest of topics. I get it. And, typically, Amy, I'm listening to conversations that are coming up in my personal life as well as in my work world. And this is a topic that came up with a friend that I was talking to over the weekend. And as we started to talk about it and talk about the different ways that it can show up in our lives, in our work lives specifically, I started thinking about so many conversations that I've had with people and just how, I have probably as a coach maybe had situations where people were in a traumatic place and looked for, let's talk about some strategies to get through that. So it got my attention because there are some things that are pretty significant and very heavy. And it's just, I think, important for us to keep in mind when we might need that extra support.
I think it is helpful, to make that distinction too, because there is, and I've heard psychologists make this distinction of like big T, little t, and big trauma being what we often associate with trauma, which is like, I had something, I was in a war, I was in a natural disaster, someone that I loved was, killed, or there was a tragic accident or something that in that moment of experience, you are changed forever. How your brain thinks, how you operate, how you respond to the world is changed forever. There is big T. And then they've also described little t, which are these other instances that we might experience, like financial trouble, uncertainty, prolonged uncertainty. It could be divorce. It could be, think of that, the chronic, just overwhelm and chronic stress, chronic burnout. Those things can lead to what can be little t, but we might not give it that association of trauma because we feel like that's only for those great big events. But in truth, our brain and body can go through some pretty similar experiences, even in the midst of that low t. So when you brought this conversation to the table, I was thinking, God, have I ever had traumatic experiences at work? Well, I can tell you that when I was 19, I waited tables for 4 months. It felt like 5 years. I feel like I have some war stories from those days.
Trial by fire. Yeah. Which, they say everyone should have a job waiting tables to have an appreciation for that. But so it sounds like that's a yes for you.
I've done retail. I kicked off my career in retail. Some of our listeners may not know that I spent about the first 10 years of my career in retail. And I spent 4 whole months waiting tables. But I will tell you that I stack my plates very neatly at every single restaurant. And I always tip well over 20%.
Yes. And you push in your chair.
That's
when you
right.
Left the table. Yeah.
Stayed with me forever. Those experiences to me of just working with the public in very real and raw ways, of being threatened, of people threatening your bodily harm, of people verbally abusing you. I certainly have had those experiences, but I've been so fortunate to work mostly with small businesses for most of my career beyond that. And I know you've had some experience in the corporate world, Des. So I'm sure yours has probably looked a bit different. Have you ever experienced trauma in the workplace? Let's start there. And if so, what did that look like?
Yeah, I would put this in the big T column. And I know we'll talk about some definitions or common causes. So I had an experience when I was in corporate America with an individual who was hired to work with the organization, but had a lot of, let's say, power and autonomy. And I think it was a combination of like bullying, harassment, probably discrimination was mixed in that cesspool of dysfunction. But I literally had a target on my back. And like, how do I literally know that? Because this person said to me, so obviously I can't fire you if I wanted to. So, I kind of stopped. I probably slid my fork through my teeth because they were kind enough to take me to lunch to say this.
Public place.
Not a good thing to leave a Cuban with a fork in their hand. But I just paused and I thought, that didn't just happen. And then I said, there might be a really good reason why I'm, quote unquote, in your words, untouchable, based upon, just look at my track record. And that started several months and months of for me, like I love, Amy, that you mentioned like mentally, emotionally, physically. I went into a mental, emotional, and physical downward spiral to the point that I started taking, this is the only time in my life, I'm grateful for it, that I've ever been on medication. And I was taking now, which you can get off the shelf, but I was taking Nexium for acid reflux. But hair falling out, so stressed. And, I think about that and it's like, how could I even have possibly thought about bringing my best self to work in that traumatic state? And it's literally one of the most horrible experiences that I've been through. And it's also one of the most defining experiences that I've had, just to learn to honor my, I talk about this a lot, my hell no's, and, advocate for myself.
I think in that moment, or not even in that moment, obviously something changed in going to lunch, and what a brave man to say those things to you with a fork in your hand, much less period. And then you enduring that for months and months and months. What did that lead you to your quote unquote kind of breaking point where you're like, I got to get the hell out of here. This is no longer for me. I now need to make a different decision for my mental, physical, emotional well-being? It
did not. It was a catalyst towards that. And I'm sure we'll talk about this, but I was involved at that time in a transformational leadership work. And through that was able to find a way to change my perception about being victimized, which I was, but I was able to change shift my perception so that this person wasn't getting my goat, so to speak. And when I stopped allowing myself to crumble and started to stand up more, but not push against and fight, it got less interesting for him to give me a hard time, which was interesting. But it was definitely a catalyst for when I left shortly after that.
If you happen to be listening and you're just in a tough spot, whether it's like personal, because little t could also be, divorce or experiencing, challenges in relationships where all of a sudden this massive change happens and it changes what you knew life to be, right? So whether it's work, whether it's home, I think all of the ways that we can face it or what we can do about it, how we look at it and some of the actions we take, they really could be interchangeable. They could be the same. And Des mentioned, some of the things that we might be experiencing. So from a work front, I think there's those common ones, right, Des, where we're like, you mentioned discrimination. Unfortunate that is even common. There's bullying. There's harassment. It could be sexual harassment. It could be physical harassment. But there's other things that we might not look at, which is chronic stress. We're understaffed. I have so much on my plate. I also think, if I reflect back on some coaching conversations I've had with folks, continued lack of organizational clarity and people just not knowing what's going to happen, when's it going to happen, that can just create so much stress for people because what they're not able to do is to see what the hell the benefit of their hard work is going for besides a check in the bank. And people want something bigger than that. Organizational changes that can be just abrupt. Gosh, I've worked with clients, Des, I bet you have too, where all of a sudden they're like, oh, we were bought out.
Yeah, right.
I don't know if I'm going to have a job. Certainly those things can come to mind. Anything we missed in that list that comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I think, and we talked about this, before hitting record, but, chronic stress ties in with excessive workload. And that made me think about, Amy, like how many men and women that I know, it's like they're working their tails off and then there are other stressors at home. It's like I'm rushing here to get to, my kid's game and then rushing here to get to dinner. And I'm scrambling to get, everybody set up. And then, hey, at 9 to 11 o'clock at night, I'm plugging back into work. And then I'm doing it again and I'm doing it again. And there's the compiled stresses, like could be org changes and things like that get piled onto that. And maybe kids are having challenges at school or, in your case, you've got one who you're launching and that was, I saw what you went through. That was really stressful and could be, oh my gosh, we've got financial woes or legal issues that we're dealing with too. And when that compounds, we get beyond a stress response, I think, into this series of events that it's like, I don't know a different way of doing things. In fact, this is a catalyst for this conversation as well. And another conversation I was having this weekend, talking to a friend, and her partner is in the medical field. He's a surgeon. And he goes, I don't know if I know how to be or work without the stress of having someone's life in my hands. And I'm like, okay, like coaching, our retreats, leadership development. I always say this isn't rocket science or curing cancer, but in his case, it's like, it's kind of built, that's a big T, trauma. And then to not know what would life be like without that.
Emily Fletcher, who we had on the Conscious Habit podcast, it was in May of 2023. So if you happen to miss that episode, I encourage you to go back and, listen to that. But one of the things I remember her sharing, and obviously the demands are going to change based on what we're faced with, right, is that stress, and if we're talking about chronic stress or, continued stress, it's very rare that there are stressful events in themselves, there are demands, and some demands greater than others. The demand of you've got someone's life in your hands, one wrong move or, something like that. That's a really, really high demand. Stress is our body's response to those demands then. And so the thing is that the demands in themselves, we don't always have control over because they're going to be there, right? They may be just like, they're part of the territory. It comes with saying, I'm going to do this. I'm going to be in this field. I'm in a leadership position, whatever. There's some of those demands that we might be able to manage, but many that just might come with the territory. But what we can do is we can manage the body's response that turns those demands into stress. So I think, if somebody's listening to this and, we're talking a bit about some of our personal experiences, some of the things that you've dealt with. By the way, we haven't mentioned this yet, but raise your hand if you've ever worked in a place where the minute you pulled in the parking lot, you felt sick to your stomach and you had to pep talk your way into going inside.
Amy, I call it the Sunday morning blues because when I was going through that situation with, I jokingly like to call this person Jack, short for jackass, or not short for jackass. I would wake up on Sunday, like flutter my eyes open on a Sunday morning and think, oh my God, I only have a day and I've got to go back to the hellhole. And it wasn't back to a job that I didn't love. It was back to the trauma. So I think a lot of us can relate to that.
Yeah. And Nikki Gregory, the founder of People Forward Network, who our podcast is produced by and the network it's hosted on, she, has been on this mission of helping people love Mondays. And I think it stemmed from that, like the Sunday scaries that kick in where you're like, oh no, responsibility, all the things like, and so many people just live for Saturday and Sunday. And like, that's such a small portion of our life. And so if you find yourself in this place, before we start to talk about what it is that we can do about it, because, we've got plenty of that, let's kind of do the ripple effect of negative. So Des, let's just put this in a scenario. Let's say I work for a company and I am experiencing chronic stress and overwhelm because the demands are high. I don't have enough help. There's not organizational clarity. My stomach is feeling sick when I pull in, every Monday. I've got to talk myself into going in. What is the ripple effect of that experience on, obviously I know what it is for me, what's happening in my department, what's happening in the organization based upon that trauma response. I'm going to talk about that. Let me share with you, there's research from the American Psychological Association and Trauma-Informed Care. Here's how they define workplace trauma. It can result from what we've talked about, single incident, series of events, a set of circumstances experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening. So that's like really big T. Symptoms, anxiety, depression, burnout, physical ailments. So you think about those symptoms that any individual can have, and then the broader impact on the organization. Culture, performance, effectiveness. Think about engagement, not to mention healthcare cost, right? The body keeps the score. So what do you think is going to happen with all of that? Dysfunctional energy is going to cause big time health issues. It's interesting, I think, for you and I, we probably have both heard this from clients over the years, is that some of their biggest challenges are retention and like finding the right people. And I think, this is the ripple effect of that. It's like, okay, if we want to find the right people, we need to first keep the right people around, because there are two types of workplaces. The ones where people say, we're hiring. Oh my gosh, you need to come work here. It's so awesome. And the type of workplace where people are saying, you got to get me out of this hellhole. Do you know anybody who's hiring? Please, please, I'll do anything. Like
exactly. And you don't want to be the latter. You don't want to be the latter.
We don't want to be the latter. That's for sure. And so There's also studies that have shown that cortisol, that you could put people in a room, and if one person has a higher level of cortisol, that it is literally essentially contagious, that it's going to raise the stress levels and the cortisol of the people around them. And it's a biological response. We can't, mind over matter our way beyond that. On a deeper level, biologically, we can sense when someone is stressed or they're off or they're experiencing, potentially some trauma, and we are going to have a response close to that. So it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't happen, it's not just one person who's affected. There's a ripple effect beyond this.
Absolutely. I mean, that just goes to show that's a good example of how it can impact the culture, the microculture in an organization. Huge impact on just engagement and just well-being. I mean, the ripple effect is big. It's real.
And I think, many people are investing and wanting to know about, engagement, and people often might think we got to give unlimited PTO. It's a keg in the break room and kombucha for the people who are non-drinkers at 2 p.m., maybe a pool table. Let's do some fun outings. And not to say that that's not great and, fun, but it is deeper than that. And I think what people are looking for and this is why the work that you and I do, and especially High Vibe Tribe Retreats, why it's so fun, is because I think what people are looking for is this ability to both acknowledge and honor the soul of themselves.
Well said.
And I think burnout is a byproduct of abandoning that over and over and over again. Ladies, imagine taking time away to work on you. Meditation, yoga, transformational work, a chance to have grand adventures and build lasting relationships. Deseri Garcia and I founded High Vibe Tribe Retreats to create just that. And if you're curious about joining us on our next retreat, head over to highvibetriberetreat.com, link in the show notes. When it comes to this trauma at work, right? And we're kind of leaning more into little t, trauma, chronic stress, the abrupt change, the, uncertainty, those sort of things. Even going back to your experience, Des, where you're like, I learned something that changed it for me. What responsibility do people have in being able to shift some of those outcomes?
I'm hesitating a little bit in saying this because if we have listeners that are in little t, big T trauma, it's really can be hard to hear, hey, oh, here's, what you can do. And I do think something that's really, really important. And Amy, you and I talked about this recently. We did a webinar, almost like a kind of a group coaching session recently. And we talked about boundaries and advocacy. And it came from, there's a book written by Dr. Pooja Lakshmi, and it's called Real Self-Care. And in the book, she talks about self-care actually came from self-preservation. If you read the book, it's like in the 50s and 60s, it was hand in hand with the civil rights movement. And I started to think about self-preservation. That is very different than how we in our society have now, defined self-care as stuff and items and candles and, all the things. And that distinction is huge. And from a place of self-preservation, I think we can all take some agency in our lives, and we have to draw some boundaries for ourselves. Whether it's like saying enough, or even if it's, I can't say that today, and I'm going to set a time down the road where I'm going to say enough, or I'm going to start working towards a different choice for myself. Whatever we can do to take agency in our lives, I think it starts there. And then there are other things that we can do from that place of our agency and advocacy, we can do things that do help us to lessen the, stress response, including, things we talk about all the time, mindfulness and meditation and even yoga, exercising, taking a walk, those types of things. What other things come to mind for you?
Well, I think piggybacking on that, I always am like in awe because if you look at Des and I, okay, Des is always so much more compassionate and empathetic and just, she is all heart. And I have to tell you, my style is a little bit like, listen up, okay? Ain't nobody gonna give a damn about your well-being more than you will. Nobody. Nobody. And honestly, guys, this is how I talk to myself. So just know that like the same thing I'm saying to you is the same thing I say in the mirror, like, Amy Woodall, listen up. This is your life. Your life. So I think that step one is this realization of what am I experiencing? What am I experiencing outside of myself? What am I experiencing inside of myself? And what am I thinking? What am I feeling? What story am I telling myself about this? Because what it sounds like you went through, Des, is something that we can do is like, how do I give myself a support system or learn something new that can help me see this differently and help see myself differently? And it sounds like that program that you invested in, you invested your time, you invested your money, it got you a new perspective because you were around people with a new perspective. And it's not that it magically changed what was happening outside of you, but it changed how you danced with it. Is that fair?
That's absolutely right. By changing my perspective and mindset about how I was going to let it or not let it destroy me mentally, emotionally, and physically, when I took, control of that and looked at what I can control and influence, not focus solely on what was uncontrollable, that shifted a lot for me.
And I think it is just like, what's the right next step? Because if you all are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and if not, you can Google it. It's a pyramid. And at the top of this is self-actualization, which is often what we're talking about is like, how do we get to the highest, best version of ourselves, which is incredible when we have all the things that we need to get there. But if you are experiencing trauma at work, you are very low in the pyramid in which you are experiencing survival mode. You are just trying to survive the moment or just trying to survive the day. And so then to expect out of yourself, or for us to even give you this advice or insight of like, let's talk about how you can step into being your highest best self, that is not fair because that is giant leaps ahead of what you need to get to the next step. So the next step really just might be, where am I? How am I feeling about this? What would I rather have? Who can I turn to? Small questions that can give us big answers and allow us to begin to step out of this. Some realizations I've had in my career, Des, that I think have helped me along this path is whose comfort am I protecting and in turn betraying my own? Who am I willing to keep more comfortable? That has helped me. The other thing is realizing when I've been working harder to make someone else's dreams come true or harder to make someone else feel good than I have myself. Some of those things have been helpful for me to realize and also coach clients through because it's easier to see in others than it is ourselves sometimes.
Absolutely. But now I know the key secret to coming in, but like right in between the eyes from Amy Woodall.
Yeah. Des got me. She's gotten me in between the eyes plenty of times. One of my favorite is when you asked me, "What are you pretending not to know?" And I think that is. I remember it was like it pissed me off, but it made me think. Which is how you know you have a really good friend where they're willing.
I love you that much.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think sometimes if we feel stuck, often the answers are within us. They're just, we just don't always want to hear them because it means we've got to do something different. And sometimes it's easier to point the finger at someone else. I've been there. And when you asked me that question, it really forced me to have to take some responsibility, which own your 50. Damn it.
Yeah. Maybe that was was that the birthplace of Own Your 50?
Potentially, it could have been.
But, yeah.
So I think in mine, it is the realization of where am I? What would I rather be? What would I rather have? And then baby steps of some of those questions. Let's build on some of those resources. If I'm in this place of feeling overwhelmed and, overstressed, not clear, feeling like I'm in the little T, what recommendations do you have?
You mentioned it, like get some support, and it could be friend, colleague, family member. We know that like connection and belonging, having community can help, even if it's one person whom you can talk to. Maybe therapy is within your grasp or not. If it's not, find that confidant that you can talk to and get support that way. And there are organizations that have support services as well that you could lean on, like EAPs, employee assistant programs. Years ago, I still buy plenty of self-help books. But boy, I mean, my entire library, that's all it was. I think everything that I have in a box right now is a self-help book. But if you found me in a bookstore, that's where I would be. But, listen to some of the experts on podcast, us, others. I'm a huge fan of a lot of
Mel Robbins.
I'll say Mel Robbins. But there's some great podcasts out there. There's great books. There's things online that can help you to maybe access those resources that when we're in it, it's hard to think about those on our own, like grasp them. It's like, oh, that's just outside of my grasp.
I think it is helpful. One of the books that is always a go-to for me when I just feel stuck or lost or uncertain, or if something does come through and it's like, I feel so overwhelmed by, the tax time coming. Oh God, what's my tax bill going to be? Oh man, how much money am I going to have to pay? I always think of the book, The Surrender Experiment by Michael Singer. And it's his autobiography where he shares he went through some major stuff in his business, like being federally indicted, having some federal charge. No, those were he was found innocent and all of that stuff. But the process and the mindset that he had, the heart set, how he was so connected to the soul of himself and just trusted it was all going to work out. That book is really, I think it's a great resource.
Yeah, I totally agree as well. Love that book. Amy, we've talked about what individuals can do, and we both work with a lot of organizations and leaders. Let's talk about, what would conscious leaders do in this situation?
Well, the recognition that somebody's off is really, it's helpful to be really tuned in. If you notice that somebody is making more mistakes, or they're late, they're dropping the ball, there's more attitude, there's just something has changed. I think it's, whether it's specifically trauma or it's prolonged stress or whatever might happen, I think to be curious and lean in and ask, how's everything going? What do you need more of? How are you feeling in your role? I love personally a 1 to 10 scale. I coach a lot of clients to this because, you could say on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being, I freaking hate it here. 10 being, this is the greatest gig I've ever had. I'm thriving. I love it. Where would you put yourself right now? And the numbers don't really matter. It just opens up conversation. Let's say they say 6. You could say, well, what's the gap for you between 6 and 10? It just allows you to understand what their perspective is. So I think leaning in, noticing, asking questions, that would certainly be where I would start. What about for you?
I love that. I think I'm going to go to the delicate side too, just because you brought that up. Like if it is a situation where you clearly see something's going on and this person isn't, for whatever reason, isn't open to talking about it. They're like, oh, I'm a 10 of 10. To just remind like maybe your entire team, hey, here are some of the support services that we have. Here are some things that we can do for ourselves. And, one of the most impactful things that we can do as leaders is model. So if we're modeling those practices and things that would help another person. Like maybe it's, hey, you know what, I'm gonna take some extra time off, during the holidays, or hey, kind of noticing everybody's working really hard. Let's do a half day on Friday or whatever that is, and don't be the person that's piling on by emailing everyone at night and texting, all hours and through the weekend. It's like, get those things in check, because that can add a tremendous amount of extra stress on folks that are going through trauma.
Mm-hmm. I've worked in teams. I think that's such a good distinction, because I've worked in teams where we've had the leaders kind of talk and their teams talk, and the teams have said things like, I feel like I have to be on all the time. Like I can't shut it off. And, I get emails at all hours of the day. And the leader would say, oh gosh, I do actually send emails really early because it's when I am the most productive, but I don't expect you to respond to those at that time. And the folks are saying, but I feel like if you email me, I have to owe you, So I think that it is helpful to say, what boundaries do I need to set as a leader for my people? And then what conversations do we need to have about expectations? Because there's times that we are stressed and overwhelmed because we put a pressure on us that other people do not expect of us. And so that clarity of just, what do we need? What do we expect? What does good look like? I think that can really help in decreasing the stress people experience.
Absolutely. Quick story about that, Amy. I was working with a leadership team, and the leader of the group said, I send emails over the weekend, and I put a uppercase bold font, do not respond to this email until Monday. And her team sat there and said, yeah, but really? And she's like, yes, I don't want you to respond. And they're like, yeah, but, and I said, you've got to stop. You got to stop, because even though you're telling them to their faces, you do not want them to respond, they still feel an obligation. They feel this deference to you being the leader. And I said, have you seen like schedule send? I said, or hold them all in a folder and send them on Monday morning. But you've got to stop, because they're showing you that, you're telling them, but they're not buying in. And it wasn't that they didn't trust her. They just felt obligated. And who knows, that might have been a tiny T, a stress response to, this is the way it's always been. And just because you're our leader now doesn't mean it's okay for me to not do this.
I was going to say, it sounds like that could be like a corporate stress response, a little corporate PTSD that's like, yeah, but I know the games that are played, and I know if I don't, then what does that really mean, and what's being held against me? And sometimes, again, like what we might be experiencing today could be from those past experiences that have clouded, I see what the brain believes, that could cloud what we think others do, want or need or expect, or what success looks like. So I think as we, wrap up today, it's important that we just recognize kind of, where am I, and am I thriving in my role? Can I actually get to a place where I can consider self-actualization? Or am I struggling? Am I in a place where I feel burned out, chronically stressed, uncertain? I have the pit in my stomach. I feel sick going into work. And just recognizing, where are you?
Do that pulse check, and remember that we take agency for ourselves every single day. I mean, if you chose the clothing that you're wearing on your back, you take agency for yourself. And remembering that, because I think in it, we can forget that we do have choices, and we can make choices for ourselves. And it starts there to then decide, to your point, what do I need? What do I want? Am I putting my oxygen mask on? And are there boundaries that I need to set?
I think the important thing too, because you and I have both coached people through this, I could just I'm hearing the conversations in my head now, is whatever you do need and want, as you mentioned, having that advocacy for yourself, what we've got to do is just do it scared and uncertain. Have the conversation, let people know what you need, because they're never going to give it to us if we don't talk about it. And at least then we know where they stand. If we're like, okay, they're not willing to give me what I need to operate from a happy, healthy place, and I feel like what I'm giving, like, hey, it's not crazy what I'm asking for here, like, this is very real, then you know how they truly value you. And then what do you want to do with that? And I've coached clients several times saying you have to have this belief system that there are so many opportunities available for you out there, this mind of abundance, that if it's not here, then it is somewhere better. And don't stay in misery. You know, we're willing to trade an unknown heaven for a known hell. What we don't want to do is do that. So figure out what you need and ask for it and let it play out how it's going to play out. But we can't create in our head, you know, well, here's how that's going to go. It's going to go how it's going to go. Doing nothing is not an option if we've reached our wit's end.
Amen. Amen to that. Any other key like takeaways for you, Amy, about this conversation?
I think the last thing I would share is I've recognized this in myself and in others over and over again, is the less that I am pouring into myself and doing the things that make me feel good, the more stressed and overwhelmed I feel with the world around me, even if those demands haven't changed, the way I interact with them have. So that, just some reflection of what am I doing today to make myself feel good and whole and connected? Am I giving myself what I need? And when I do that, it's sometimes like what you did that. You gave yourself that time to experience something new, to learn something new, and then you saw it and were able to respond differently. Last takeaways from you, Miss Des?
Gosh, you know, I absolutely love what you said about like if I have someone else's, like their best interests come before yourself, man, you're advocating for them and not you. Like that's a sign. That is a sign. I absolutely love that. And again, I think it's good to remember that there are options. There are always options, you know, to that abundance mindset. There are always things resources we can reach out to. There are people, there are things that we can do that again, give us those opportunities for advocacy and agency for ourselves.
Well, thank you for being a resource for myself and for the listeners. We get such great feedback on our joint episodes of people who are texting us saying, I love this episode you guys are doing together. And I encourage listeners to go check out your website at Vida Aventura. You've got some great tools there. I know one in particular is really about building a winning team. How do people get access to that, Des?
So if you go to my website, Vida, Vida, Aventura, so another A, VENTURA.net. And when you go there, you'll see a banner across the top of the website where you can click on and you can download 5 ways to build a winning team. And I will say, Amy, there are some incredible components in that in the trust piece where, you know, I talk about how to build vulnerability-based trust. Those are components of what it takes to also put these, you know, support systems into place for your team and also for yourself.
Love that. Thank you for bringing this topic up today, Des. I think at the end of the day, what we hope to do on Conscious Habit is to remind us all that we are humans. We need to take care of ourselves and each other. Life happens from the inside out. And man, good stuff here today. Big love, everybody.
Big love, all.
Thanks for listening to the Conscious Habit podcast. If you dug this episode, we'd love it if you would subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. And if you're into this consciousness thing, if you like this conversation and you want to meet more like-minded people, head on over to Facebook and join the Conscious Habit community. Until next time, do the world a favor and go love yourself.